Do you ever wonder why the American Revolution happened? It was because of taxation without representation. I'm Sage, the lead and summarizer, Nate is cross-ex, and Everly is rebutter. We believe taxation without representation was a just cause for the Revolutionary War. We value fairness. Taxation without representation means taxes imposed on people without their vote. Our contentions are no representation, the British didn't listen, and colonists didn't participate. Contention 1, no representation. Our first contention is that the colonists had no representation. The British would give tax to the colonists to pay off their own debts without telling them why. TCI says that they were mostly angry because they had no say in the law. The colonists had no government that could confirm the laws, so whatever King George said would go. This is unfair because they're not being allowed to say something. Another website, AmericanRevolution.org, states, to the British, the whole purpose of having overseas colonies was to enrich their empire. The British were taking advantage of the rule by adding more taxes, which was making people mad. This is unfair because the colonists only went there to be free from British rule, not to help them more. If you think that the British were just trying to get their own money back, you're wrong because they were using it for their own empire. With the British having so much power over them, they can do a lot, which is why there should be representatives to control this. We can see fairness in this because the British are using their power to make their country better for their problems, which was unfair. Contention 2, didn't listen. Our second reason is that the British didn't listen. This is basically like a parent and child, but Great Britain is the parent and the colonies are the child. This is because the parent is telling the child some unfair rule and the child keeps fighting back and the parent doesn't listen to the child. This analogy was from our textbook, Social Studies Alive. This is unfair because the parent is being unreasonable. Another reason that Great Britain didn't listen is from students' history that says, the Stamp Act, Sugar Act, Townshend Act, and Intolerable Acts are 4 acts that ultimately led to the American Revolution. But even after all these acts where the colonists fought back over and over, the British still didn't listen. This is unfair to the colonists who fight back. Additionally, again from the article, British Acts aimed at the colonists, it says the first act was the Sugar Act. This placed a tax on sugar, which they fought back because they didn't have representatives to vote on that act. But again, the British simply ignored them and started making a new act. This is unfair because the British keep making all these acts, but the colonists can't even have any say whatsoever. Contention 3, didn't participate. Our last contention is that the colonists were not even the ones that participated in the war that made the British have so much debt. If they were the ones that angered the French, then it is very reasonable that they should pay the taxes. But according to Social Studies Alive, they were not the ones who brought the debts over their own country. This shows fairness because the British did not care much about the colonists. Another reason is from the Office of the Historian.gov. It states that the colonists already gave Britain supplies to use in the war, so if the colonists had already given British so much, then why ask for more? This is unfair for the colonists. The British gave them no rights to have representatives in taxes that they made from their own debts. According to Office of the Historian, a series of incidents in the upper Ohio River Valley, which the French and British governments both claimed as their territory, caused the war. This means that the cause for the American Revolution this means that the colonists did not fight with the French. Therefore, it's not fair that they have to pay. In summary, we believe that in the affirmative stance that taxation without representation was a just cause for the American Revolution, and to support this, we value fairness. Thank you for your time. We are now ready for cross-examination.
Where did you get the information about the British using the tax money for their own empire?
We got that information from articles from TCI and Office of the Historian.
How do you know that TCI and officers of the historian are reliable sources?
Because they're both made by government, because they're .govs.
Wouldn't it be okay if the British taxed the colonies because the British protected them?
Well, they only protected them sometimes, and still the colonies got hurt.
Okay, well, do you remember when the colonies put the British East Indian Company into debt?
Yes.
Well, why did they do that to their own protectors?
Because they were trying to show them that they didn't like the taxes.
Why not? Because the British deserve something for their hard work, right?
Well, kind of.
Why did the colonies dislike the tax?
because it harmed their people and was taking their money, which some of them had to get dropped from their jobs and houses.
How could the colonies protect themselves without the British?
Well, they can, and we know that because when they actually started the American Revolution, they did win, meaning that they could fight for themselves.
How would that benefit the British?
What then?
No. That's all the questions I have.
Do you ever wonder about how the colonists put the East Indian Company into debt? Well, we are arguing taxation without representation. We strongly believe that was not a disguise for the American Revolution. Hi, my name is Helena, and I am the lead. My teammates are Javante, the co-lead, Isaac, the cross and the rebuttal, and Ashley, the summarizer. We chose safety because the British protected the colonists during the French and Indian War. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, taxation is taking people's money for the government. Representation is an act or speech on behalf of a person or the like by an agent, deputy, or representative. Our three contentions are French and Indian War, Boston Tea Party, and the Boston Massacre. Contention 1, French and Indian War. The phrase taxation without representation became a rallying cry for American revolutionaries. However, the assertion overlooks the critical role that the British protection and governments played in the lives of the American colonists. The British Empire, through military and economic means, ensured the safety and stability of the colonies, which must be considered when evaluating the justice of taxation. During the 18th century, the colonies were growing in size, but there were still many threats. The British military provided a buffer against these threats, giving the colonists safety that they couldn't have on their own. The costs from the protection would make the taxes imposed by Britain, and now they can be seen as a means of funding the very protection that ensured the colonists' safety and well-being. While the colonies now have direct representation in Parliament, they were a part of a larger empire that offered indirect representation, wherein the interests were considered in broader imperial decisions. Information from Investopedia. The British government sought to balance the needs and safety of the colonies with its own financial constraints. Contention 2. History.com says that the Boston Tea Party was a political protest that occurred on December 16, 1773 at Griffin's Wharf in Boston, Massachusetts. American colonists, frustrated and angry at Britain for imposing taxation without representation, dumped 342 chests of tea imported by the British East India Company into the harbor. The event was the first major act of defiance to British rule over the colonies. It showed Great Britain that the Americans would not tolerate taxation and tyranny sitting down, and rallied American patriots across the 13 colonies to fight for independence, which is the colonies being mad about helping to pay war debts. The colonies should have helped because before the colonies gained independence, the colonies were a part of Britain, so they should have helped pay war debts. The Stamp Act was the reason why the Boston Tea Party started. History.com says that the Stamp Act of 1765 was the first internal tax levied directly on the American colonists by the British Parliament. The act was imposed a tax on all paper documents in the colonies. Came at a time where the British Empire was deep into debt from the 7 Years' War, and looking to its North American colonies as a revenue source. This is why the colonies got mad, because they didn't like being taxed on the stamp, when the British were just trying to make some extra money so that they could pay off their war debts. This ties into a value of safety because the Boston Tea Party was the colonies being violent, and that wasn't safe for the colonies, and it wasn't safe for the British. Contention 3, Boston Massacre. The Quartering Act of 1773 let British soldiers be able to go into anyone's house and stay there for a while, meaning they were fed, clothed, and cleaned by homeowners. The colonists did not like this and started to hate the soldiers. The Boston Massacre colonists were throwing snowballs and rocks at the soldiers guarding the tax house. This was his job. His mates came and they all panicked, causing them to misfire. This wouldn't have happened if the colonists were not attacking the soldier. After all of the protection or safety the British gave them, they decided to ruin the economy and ruin the soldiers' reputations after what they've done for them. This is why the taxation without representation was not just cause for the American, because they were not. Are you saying that it was right for the British to give a lot of taxes to the colonies?
ignore the colonies and then assault them after?
Yes, because the British needed money to pay off their war debts, and if the British weren't able to pay off their war debts, the French would eventually might even come back and start another war with them, which could then get involved with the colonies, and the colonies could die.
Why did the British give them taxes if they weren't the ones who participated in the war?
Because if the British didn't have that money, then they wouldn't be able to protect the colonies nor feed them or keep them safe.
Couldn't the British just tax the people who started the war, and why didn't they?
They didn't tax the French because they didn't tax France because if they did, it was a little bit risky because they knew that if they started another war, they would get even in deeper debt, or they would eventually lose the war and then have to pay off even more debt.
If it was fine to give the colonies taxes, does that mean they could just randomly give some Canada taxes?
No.
Why didn't the British take the signs and letters that the Americans gave them, saying that they did not like it?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Why didn't the British take the signs and letters that the Americans gave them, saying they did not appreciate the taxes?
Because if they did and they eventually read them, it might take up some time, and time was of the essence back in the days.
In Contention 3, you said that the British soldiers could just barge into colonists' houses and stay there. Doesn't that invade the colonists' safety?
Yes, it does. Yes and no. Yes, because say if they were having say if it was Thanksgiving and the British were still in a war and they barged in while they were either praying or eating, yes, it would barge in on their safety. And no, because say if a soldier was dying of hunger and they had a lot of injuries, if they had gone in and they just needed a couple bread or something to eat, then it would have been fine if the colonies gave them food or shelter.
If the British had other colonies around the world, it said in Wikipedia.org. So why didn't they just use those other richer colonies to get money?
Because if they did use those other colonies, then it would take a lot of
To summarize everything we've said, our value is fairness, and we believe in the affirmative side. Taxation without representation was a just cause for the American Revolution. Contention 1 states that the colonists had no representation, and to prove that, TCI says, but they were mostly angry because they had no say in the law. In Contention 2, we stated that the British didn't listen. Some information is quoted from students' history. The Stamp Act, Sugar Act, Townshend Acts, and Intolerable Acts are 4 acts that ultimately led to the American Revolution. Lastly, in Contention 3, we stated that the colonists didn't participate. An office of the historian.gov proved this by stating a series of incidents in the upper Ohio River Valley caused the war. During cross-examination, we saw some weak answers, like when asking, "Are you saying that it was right of the British to give unnecessary taxes, completely ignore them, and even assault them after?" In contentions, we noticed that there weren't any sources, so how are we supposed to believe that their info is correct? They also stated that the British just threw the money away that they collected, so why would they even tax the colonists so much just to waste it? The rebutter said things like it was okay to harm the colonies and that the British could lose wars. Thank you, judges and the audience, for coming to our winter debate, and we hope that you'll vote for us. Also, thank you, Mr. Lee, for creating this wonderful debate.
In your summarization, you said we didn't have any sources when we said we had history.com and Investopedia. And in our cross-examination time, we asked, how would the colonies protect themselves from the British? Our opponent colonists responded with, they could because they won the American Revolution, but this happened after the tax, which the colonies wouldn't have known they could beat the British, so that didn't really improve the argument. Another thing we said was, wouldn't it be okay if the British taxed the colonies because the British protected them? And they responded with, well, kind of. This wasn't a particularly strong answer because it was not a completely straight answer, and this didn't improve their argument either. Our value is safety, and here are our contentions to show you should vote for us. Contention 1, the French and Indian War was related to taxation without representation because the British had to pay for military war debts. So they taxed the colonies while protecting them by sending the military that the British had to pay debts to use a lot more, so bad stuff did not happen. Contention 2, the Boston Tea Party was related to taxation without representation because the Boston Tea Party happened because of taxation without representation. And during the Boston Tea Party, 342 chests, or 90,000 pounds of tea, were dumped into the ocean by the colonists just because the colonists had to pay a tax. Contention 3, Boston Massacre was related to taxation because, yep, you guessed it, because of taxation without representation and the colonists being mad about just having to pay some little tax to help the people who protected them. Instead, the colonists threw rocks and snowballs at a British soldier doing his job of protecting the taxes. And when his maintenance came, they all panicked and had no other option besides shooting the colonists. Our sources are...